What's up, folks? This is Dan from Discern, and these are my thoughts on the new track from Lecrae, Can't Stop Me Now, Destination. Lecrae is a hip-hop artist, rapper, producer, author, and the head of the label Reach Records, just to name a few titles, currently living in Atlanta. He is unequivocally the most well-known Christian rapper in history, as he has reached levels even beyond the boundaries of the Christian hip-hop community. Even within the secular music community, he's become a well-known artist. Just this year, he signed to Columbia Records, a major label, the home of artists like Adele, Beyonce, Bob Dylan, Daft Punk, J. Cole, and Pharrell, just to name a few. His rise isn't without the critics, though, who have seen where he came from and where he is now, and see a stark difference in messaging. In his origins, he was explicitly, undoubtedly gospel-centered and Christ-centered. Everything he was putting out was a bucket full of living water, dousing you with the good news of the gospel and honestly confronting the realities of sin, internally in the heart and externally in the lives of individuals and communities. And he blew the doors off the hinges when it comes to Christian hip-hop and brought in a lot of new listeners into the fold, people who were intrigued by this holy hip-hop. And even though that community had been around for quite a while, he, as well as others at the time, really helped energize it like it had never seen before. But his messaging now has certainly moved away from the clear, outspoken statements about the person of Jesus and the gospel message, and has shifted to more community building and culture shaping. And while Lecrae has said many times that the message hasn't changed, the words in which he delivers that message and the articulation of that message unquestionably have changed. And that's generally the essence of the critical thoughts surrounding Lecrae. You know, things like, why have you stopped speaking so boldly and proudly regarding the gospel? Why has the gospel message become so subtle and muted within your music when it used to be so front and center? And then, dangerously, honestly, they start judging motives, like, have your priorities actually changed? Generally, in summary, that's what leads so many people to ride him on social media and just criticize him with each new release. It's almost unfortunate for him that he is compared to his former self in this way. Lecrae has been working on, and mostly is finished with now, a new album that he says is scheduled for release in early 2017. And this new song, Can't Stop Me Now, Destination, which also led the kickoff of his Destination tour, was released just last week. It's the first single from this upcoming yet-to-be-titled album. Before I dive into the meat of this track, the lyrics, the themes, let me say a few things on the musical side, because this is quite possibly my favorite instrumental on a hip-hop track I've heard all year. It's not a heavy hitter, it's not super sleek and slick, but it creates a fascinating and tranquil mood with a variety of instruments and layers. You got buttery smooth bass, sorrowful muted horns, psychedelic warbly guitars, and minimal drums with an acoustic drum set feel. It's a strange, but I think very successful combination of hip-hop, reggae, and psychedelic. I mean, the first few seconds immediately reminded me of something you would hear from Pink Floyd. I mean, from a genre and style that is just typically light years away from hip-hop. They're fundamentally different genres, but aspects of each are brought together here in a miraculously effective instrumental. It has a sluggish feeling to it, as well, as if each beat is being pulled through deep water, slow-moving and tiring, emblematic of the depression that's talked about in the lyrics. And the hooks from Marcus Randall, also known as Childish Major, is symbiotically one with the instrumental. He just slides along, slightly dragging his feet with the tempo, and delivering a really fitting performance with an impressionable melody. And the recording is backed by some great vocal doubles, some harmonies, and a subtle choir of oohs in the background. Blissful sound from the vocals, just hand in hand with the backing production. When Lecrae's verses come in, I think his pacing and flow which is a little quicker and a little more energetic. Conflicts a bit with the slow rolling of the instrumental, but you know, it's a marginal complaint, nothing that ruins it or anything like that. All this being said, you know, after my lauding of this track, I'm going to burst your bubble here, as my bubble was burst. This instrumental, with all its beautiful complexities and qualities, is a Sufjan Stevens sample. The song is called Joharia, and when I listened to that original song, it basically extinguished the fire and excitement I was feeling toward Lecrae. I mean, if this was a Lecrae and team original production, I would be psyched for how this sound will play out on the upcoming album. But knowing that it's almost entirely a sample, like almost everything, save for a few added beats, I mean, at least 80% of the instrumental is the straight sample. Knowing that, I'm not necessarily hopeful that I'm going to be head over heels for the sound of his next album. Unless the use of this Sufjan Stevens sample is indicative of the other samples and flavors of the instrumentals we can expect from the album. I mean, that was a good choice for a sample, I will give them that. But I doubt that the sound of this track will be too similar to the rest of the album, considering I think Lecrae said in an interview that this track comes on the tail end of the album, so it's probably one of the more down-tempo and cooled-off tracks, just probably one of a few within the album. All right, let's move on to the lyrical aspect of this track, which is the most outspoken and front and center aspect of the song. In examining the context of around the release of this song, from Lecrae's personal life to the broader history of movements like Black Lives Matter over the last few years, and even looking at an open letter he wrote that was published by the Huffington Post the day before this song dropped, there is a lot to unpack and understand. In fact, just for your broader understanding, I will link to that open letter down in the description box. This song expresses the depression he's experienced over the last few years, feelings particularly driven by the severe scrutiny that's been on him as he pushes deeper into secular music culture and seemingly away from explicitly gospel-centered music, and from the backlash he received after aligning himself with the Black Lives Matter movement. As he said before, more the sentiment rather than the organization, making his voice heard about the problems he sees and has personally encountered within policing in this country. And further, he was deeply affected by seeing those he respected in the Christian community either staying quiet on this topic or actually being slanderous and lashing out at Black Lives Matter, or Lecrae specifically. He says that he ended up seeing and interpreting that as God turning his back on this movement, as God turning a blind eye to what was happening. Now, he knows that wasn't the case, but internally, that's how these circumstances registered in his heart. That's how it played out, and it crushed him, and it sent him spinning, in a sense. And through the last year or so, even though his book was a bestseller, even though his album was selling great, I think it went gold, he was still in turmoil and conflict internally. And this song is his attempt to unwrap those internal feelings, open up, acknowledge it, and try to move forward. In the lyrics, I think Lecrae does a good job of setting the stage, painting the picture of his depression, the real causes and sparks that ignited the destructive flames of the depression. Through this track's only 2 verses, actually, which is kind of short in terms of content, he uses some cutting and sharp phrases and words to unwrap the issues and open up on how he's feeling. He speaks to being betrayed by friends, being attacked for speaking his mind, doubting God in deep and troubling ways, and he pictures harsh realities like drug use and murder, sometimes metaphorically and sometimes literally. I think he makes his case in a pretty compelling way, bringing you into the feelings he has experienced over the last year or two. But I felt less compelled by the solution to this problem, or how this depression was or will be overcome. In the first verse, Lecrae speaks boldly and directly to the causes of his depression. But in the second verse, he speaks in broader, less defined terms about the ways out of this depression. He says things like, recently I found a peace to be everything that I was meant to be. This my identity, this what he give to me. And he also says, I know that God got a greater plan for the death and blood that we spill. And the plan and the peace or the identity that he talks about are pieces of the puzzle, the greater picture of what he's trying to say, that I'm sort of left to fill in for myself. He doesn't articulate the substance behind those terms, so I'm left feeling a vague sense of, well, it will just be all right. And the lyrical crown of this song, the hook and even the pre-hook that Lecrae takes, are the height of this sort of arbitrary and trite description of the pathway out of depression. In the pre-hook, Lecrae says, tell depression it can fly away, tell my doubts that they can die today. Can't stop me now. Is it a message of the power of positive thinking? A message that you can do it if you just try hard enough, you can work your way out of it. There isn't enough that's tangible in those lyrics to parse out what he really means. And frankly, it's deeply depressing and sad to think that the way out of depression is just to tell him to go away, as it even says in the hook. Tell it to go away? Say, you can't stop me now? I understand the desire to want to feel like you aren't defeated, to feel like life isn't over, there is a hope in the midst of the depression. But this magical hand-waving and Peter Pan wishing of thinking your depression away is not a lasting solution. It's a band-aid to the heart problems and anxieties that are buried deep in someone dealing with depression. It's a painful and often slow process to wade out of depression's drowning depths. And it's kind of flippant of this song to portray a glossy way out as a simple, tell it to go away, yeah, it's all going to be okay. Now, I don't think Lecrae and Marcus Randall were trying to be flippant or trite in this song, but the fact is the undefined generalities that this song uses to portray the solution to the depression end up coming across that way. And it's kind of ironic that in a Facebook Live video recently, Lecrae said, depression isn't something you can snap out of. Yet this song certainly seems to encourage you to tell it to go away as if that's the solution. Overall, this track was a great musical experience. I loved it, although I was disappointed to feel so duped that Sufjan Stevens had really created the musical mood rather than Lecrae and his team. Lyrically, it could have been more tangible and creatively personal when it came to the way out of his depression. I feel like I understood and I feel empathetic toward Lecrae and his heart and his mind more on the negative side of his experience, more so than I did on the positive side. Whether this track is indicative of anything from his upcoming album coming early next year, I don't really know. I'm sure there will be more singles before that album's released. Anyway, we shall see. There is a link in the description box below this video to listen to this track. I definitely encourage you to. It's a great track. There is a link to Lecrae's Twitter as well if that's something you're interested in. And with that, thank you so much for watching this track review. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. New track reviews just like this one release every Wednesday, and new album reviews release every Friday. If you have a question or a comment for me about this track, about my thoughts about this track, or about something else, you can comment below this video. You can tweet at me at discernreviews, or you can send me an email, discernreviews@gmail.com. Have you listened to this track from Lecrae? Did you recognize the Sufjan Stevens sample, or did you feel duped like me? What do you think of the message of the song, or the way in which Lecrae delivered that message? Let me know what you're thinking, folks. Anyway, hope this helps. See ya.